Welcome to Goldfish on Games and Cover Disc Face Off XL, where for May of 1991 it's a special month, as we get to see the very first issue of Amiga Power. And up against this brand new magazine is CU Amiga, Amiga Format, the one for Amiga, and Amiga Action. Fight! And first had to be Amiga Power, that celebrated its first ever issue with giving away a full free game. Something that generated a bit of worry with the other magazines and publishers at the time, as no one wanted to start off the cover tape wars of the spectrum. And did they have to worry about it with this? Well, the game that they provided was Bomboozle, which was a near 3-year-old title at this point, and was developed by Ross Dudley and Anthony Carruthers, who would collaborate on Liberation 2 Captive.
Player 1, get ready.
The game itself is a puzzler, where you have to detonate all the bombs on the level without being blown up yourself. And you also have to avoid other things like walking off into the water, or being knocked off, which isn't as easy as it sounds, and that doesn't sound all that easy. This is partially because of the isometric view, so you're going to have to get your head around the directions that you'll need to press to actually move the character. And then you have to consider the bombs and their placements, as there are chain reactions, as in bombs that if they're next to each other will also explode.
Player 1, get ready.
And then even on this first level, you have tiles that you can only step on once. Now some of this complexity is reduced if you switch to the 2D view, but I really feel they expected people to play in 3D, if just because they put a lot of effort in with those graphics. As you might imagine, the further you get into the game, the more tile types show up, like the icy ones that will keep you moving if you touch them, or you'll find these larger bombs that have an equally larger explosion radius. Or you can even pick some up and move them around if they happen to be sat on the right tile type. So there is a lot for you to learn as you go, and it does a reasonable job of introducing these concepts. But the game doesn't like you to sit around too long, because there is also a timer that will place a flinger that if you step on it will push you around. So you can't really just sit there and try and think and plan what you're going to do, which is the opposite of where puzzle games were at this point, as we had stuff like Lemmings that actually let you pause the game and work out what it is you needed to do. It's a neat enough game, and it has some cool ideas, particularly as a free title, but I wouldn't have gone out of my way to buy it, even if there is a lot of content here, as there's hundreds of levels, some of which were made by industry-leading legends like Jeff Minter. Now you may or may not know that this isn't the only magazine show around, and this month we could be seen as the warm-up act for Yesterzine, the monthly show about the monthly magazines. And they might be covering something not a million miles away from some of the content in this very episode. So if you've not checked them out before, you should do after this episode, obviously. As this was the only title that Amiga Power provided us, let's move on to Amiga Format, that decided not to get in on the free game thing and instead had a demo and a few utilities. The demo is a bit of an interesting one as it's for gods. And at first you might think that this is just the first level of the game, as you pick up the weapons and you have to throw it at the baddies exactly like you started it. But then as you start to flick some of the switches to turn the traps off, you start to notice some of the changes, like this door being here which wasn't there in the final game. As well as you've been able to power yourself up far more than the original, at least at this point. But it also turns out to have a lot of the stuff from the final game, like the secret combo of switches that opens up this hidden area. But as we go on to the second part, that's where things really start to change. And the graphics are a little different, as are the baddies. And then what we know completely changes, as we have this whole extra area of the game to explore. Now I think this might be me, but I don't recall the baddies of the final game holding items in their hands. I don't know if this is based on some early version of the game, or if they edited the level to make something unique for this demo, but either way, this is really quite cool. When it comes to the extras on the disc, well, it is a little bit more limited. There's this nice image of the month, and then there are a few tools. One that lets you show pictures, like the one we just seen, and the other is PP More, a tool that tends to be quite popular these days for viewing README files. The final bit of software is a sample editor, a program for, yes, editing audio samples. So you can change the pitch, you can speed it up, slow it down, all sorts of fun things, or even reverse it. And thankfully they included a few samples for you to mess around with. The next magazine is the one for Amiga, that over its 2 discs provided a full game but also 2 demos, and that full game being Emotion, also known as the Game of Harmony. That once we get past the Einstein title screen, we find an odd little game, as it's mostly one about shaded balls. And the aim of the game is to get the balls to touch each other, and if they just happen to be the same colour, then they'll cancel each other out. And you do all this by moving that ball with the arrow on it. That moves very much like the craft from Asteroids. So this is more of a puzzle game than a shooter, and it's also far more complex than it might first appear, as those lines that are connecting the spheres affect how they move, and everything has a momentum and a weight to it. You can also push them off the side of the screen, where they'll show up on the other side, which plays complete havoc with the ropes. And with this first level having both the ropes and the blocks, it makes for a really difficult first level. They really needed to introduce these concepts one at a time, and slowly build it up. Because even from the start there are complexities that you might not realise, as if you mess up and have 2 different colours touch, then they'll spawn a pellet of a new colour. Now these can be helpful if you quickly run over them, as they will restore some of your health. But if you aren't quick enough, then it'll grow into a full sphere that you'll also have to deal with. Or you can leave it alone long enough and it will then explode, taking down some of your health. This means you're constantly up against the clock, even if there isn't one on screen, as if you leave any of these spheres alone for too long, they will explode. I find it a little bit much, and I can see why this might have been picked as a cover disc, as it is an inventive game, but it's also a complex one that might look a little too basic in the graphics department for really good box art images, and it's hard enough to describe in the little blurbs on the back of the boxes. And at this point the game was barely a year old, but in that time it had already been included in a number of bundle packs that were given away with Amiga 500s. So there is a chance that quite a few A500 owners might have already had this title, even if they didn't actively go out to buy it. So let's move on to the demos, and the first one is for Elf. This is the one released by Ocean rather than the earlier one by Microvalue, and at its core is a platformer, but one that isn't just a basic make your way to the exit. I've not really played this one before, so this is the first time I've seen these lush looking backgrounds, even if the character animation is a bit stilted. And it looks odd with the elf holding its arm out with the power ring. But at the same time, this game throws a lot on the screen and doesn't really slow down, even when you start blasting away at them. But I do wish it wasn't quite so busy with the baddies, as it's feeling like there's way too many of them, even if they do give you ample health. Now at some point you'll start to collect items, and then you'll even find some people to interact with. This includes being able to actually talk to them, and I do mean talk as you have to type out your messages. And then you can get to trade with them or bribe them and get new items or things to open up new areas. This seems like a sizable demo with a lot of screens for you to visit, and it does hint at a much deeper game than I possibly was first expecting, so this might be one I'll have to return to. The last demo for the one is Gem X.
I love you.
A puzzle game that might make you think it's a columns-like,
Good luck.
or even one of those rotate blocks to make groups of 3, but actually it's not like either of those. And it's not even a 2-player game, which I first thought. Instead, you need to make the left-hand side look like the right-hand side. And you do this by touching the gems, which will make it change its colour. And you can see the order they'll go through in the bar in the middle. But even that isn't the end of it, as the one that you click on will change twice, while the gems directly around it, north, south, east, west, will only change once. Now this all sounds a little bit complex, and it is a little bit, but often you can work out what you need to select by just seeing the differences between the two sides of the screen. And then quite often it will become apparent. Although some of the levels are far more complicated, as it seems that when you get down to the yellow, if you try changing it again, it will remove it from the grid. So you'll then have to work out how you want to drop everything down when you're trying to make it look like the other side. In this demo there are a limited number of puzzles that you'll have to solve, and it'll just randomly keep picking it. But in the full game there's 45 different puzzle sets, and it turns out the X part of the name is also relevant, as it has some more risque images as bookends between different batches of the puzzles. And this has a very interesting presentation, with both its art style and those voice samples. And it's weird to think that this is a German company that's gone so heavy on an anime style aesthetic, but I think they actually pull it off.
Yeah.
It's time to move on, as we have UK Amiga next, and they just had a single full game, which is Army Moves. And from this game, I can only make two assumptions. One, CU were caught unawares by everyone else putting out a full game, and so they got the first thing they could get their hands on. And two, UK Amiga hates us. I'm not sure why, I don't know what we did to them, but they must have truly hated us to give us this game for free. As it's a side-scrolling shooter, in the style of Moon Patrol, but without any of what made that game fun to play. The enemies will randomly show up either flying or along the ground, and your craft will shoot up in the air or at the ground. It's a little random and clunky. But that pretty much describes the whole game, as the collision detection also feels quite random, so you'll have to keep jumping around to avoid the missiles, as even the tiniest bit of explosion will set you off. You also have to jump over these holes, all while that awful music keeps playing. I know this came out in 1988, but I've played PD games that were much better than this. And it's not just me. The reviews for this game were also awful. CU Amiga itself reviewed this game way back in its 6th episode, and after giving it just 40%, they had this to say about it.
After having played Army Moods for some considerable time today, I've come to the conclusion that it isn't a very enjoyable game. In fact, it's about as much fun as standing next to a fat sweaty man in a crowded tube train on the way home from Farringdon.
I have nothing else to add to that, if mostly because I just want to stop playing this game. So let's move on to the final magazine for the month, and it's Amiga Action, that provided 2 discs with again a full game as well as a single demo. And that free game is Iliad, which starts off with a very impressive intro, and hints that this might not have been a dusted off older game. This instead is actually a brand new title, one that was published in the UK by Amiga Action, but got a regular release in Europe via Ubisoft. And once the intro is done, we find a side-scrolling shooter, and one that has a surprising amount of detail and animation going on, even if I do think it makes the main craft look a little fussy. But I do like how there's more verticality to this game than most horizontal shooters. It also shows its Euro heritage, with the baddies having way more health than they really should do. More so when you realise it's a single shot death for you. Even grazing a wall is a quick end. So you'll have to get good at avoiding or trying to shoot down the huge number of enemies that it throws around. More so later on, as this isn't a bullet hell but a baddie hell game. The difficulty is about what you'd expect for this type of title, but you do get a large range of weapons to try and even up the odds. Now these can't be upgraded, but they can be replaced when enemies drop new capsules, so you'll have to decide if you want to switch your weapon or not. And it will take a few goes to actually work out all the different ones that you can actually use. Now while I'm not the best at this sort of game, I have to admit I enjoyed it for what it is, if just because that they were throwing around so much on screen and it didn't slow down at all. And it's not just the numbers, they put some huge baddies up there as well. So it's a very impressive title, even if it isn't one that I would really play all that much of. And let's move on to the final demo of the month and the magazine. It's Armageddon. Now if I remember correctly, we checked out its sequel in another episode, and it left me a little bit confused, but it was quite interesting. So now we get to experience the original, that has a very nicely done intro. It's very impressive. And this continues into the game once you work out how to get through the menu. It's still this complex system, because in game we have a full 3D combat game, I think, because I never quite worked out what it is you're meant to be doing in this series, but I can get the vehicle going and I can travel around, and eventually I will get attacked. And I think I can shoot down some of the opposition, though it's not particularly easy when you're a tank and you're attacking a plane, but that is how it goes. But I do have a wide range of weapon systems with lasers and missiles and cannons. That will be different depending on which unit you pick, as there's tanks and planes and hover cars, and you can customize them as well. This all runs very nicely on an Amiga 500, which is a feat in itself, and it's one of those games that I hear is highly regarded, and I can see some of that in this demo, even if I'm not very good at it. But thankfully you can just let it go after a little while and it will play its own rolling demo, which makes the game look so much better than anything that I could do. So let's wrap this episode up. And due to it being an XL one, we get to pick our 3 best bits of software. But in last place, I'm going to say Armageddon. This is something I probably would have put a lot of time into back in the day, and I'm sure I would eventually have worked out what it is you're meant to be doing after reading the magazine and playing it constantly. But I have to admit, just booting it up and watching it would have been a really good thing to do. In second place, it's Gods. I've always had a soft spot for this game, and I think this is a cool demo with its unique take on the first few levels, and I would have spent ages trying to work out that final puzzle. And in first place, I'm gonna say Elf. I feel out of all the titles we got to see today, this is the one that I probably would have put the most time into, as it seems like a large and deeper game than what I was first expecting, and I think I really would have enjoyed digging into it more. And with that, we are at the end of the month. As always, let me know what your thoughts are on the rankings. Did I get it right or wrong? What was your picks of the month? Tell me in the comments. And while you're down there, try pressing some of the buttons, as it will let YouTube know that you enjoyed it, and it will let you know when new videos are released. Also, a big thanks to Dudley of Yesterzine for the extra voiceover work, so go check out his channel. And until next time, I was the Goldfish, that was the start of Amiga Power, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, then please check out some of my other videos, as I've been making cover disc videos for quite a few years now, and there's a large backlog for you to check out. Or if you're just wanting more Amiga content, I have quite the range of reviews and list videos that goes over Amiga games. So I hope to see you again soon.